And we've seen that although there's a lot of confidence in the room, there's also a lot of need to grow, to develop capacity, perhaps to increase our different collaborations, or whatever reasons that you say we need to still do some stuff. And this is why we're here today, to get those new perspectives, those new horizons. And we're starting now with our keynote speech. And this is a great pleasure for me now to introduce Julie Owono. She's Executing Director of the Digital Rights Civil Society Organization, Internet Without Borders. Internet Without Borders aims to promote and protect freedom for all on the internet worldwide. And Julie is also an inaugural member of the Facebook Oversight Board, which as a Facebook user, I'm very pleased. So Julie, thank you so much. And ladies and gentlemen, if you would please leave questions on Wisembly, we'll be able to pick those up with Julie as we move forward. Julie, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Can I go ahead? I think so. Okay. Hello, everyone. I will say good morning because I am calling in from the Bay Area, the San Francisco Bay Area. So it's 4:21 here for me, and I'm extremely glad to be here with you this morning. Thank you. So when I was contacted by the GIZ members to discuss with you this morning, I thought I would share stories while giving this keynote speech. I feel like stories are always much more powerful. So I think we can just go ahead with the presentation. You will excuse me because I will communicate with the excellent back office who is helping me. So I think the presentation is up, so I'll just go ahead. So I think it's important to share the stories, especially since we are all in this uncharted territory of, digital transformation. What does it actually mean? And I think that's the first question that I wanted us to ask ourselves, because we live that on a daily basis, and we feel like it's a kind of a natural process, especially for those who were born with the internet being as widely available as it is increasingly now, although, of course, a large party of the humanity is still yet to access. So my first question would be, what is even digital transformation? And if some of you have done that already, you will see that there are a lot of results on the main Google, the main search engine, and on the main page of that search engine results for this word. So what is it even? And what you will see when you do that research is that a lot of the definitions are given from a business perspective. It's actually the process through which a company will enhance its productivity through adopting digital forms of sharing information and of communication. And we see that increasingly as well for governments. And this calls for, an understanding of what that means. And what I like is, and what I would like to share with you is kind of a complementary definition given by the European Parliament Research Service, which is digital transformation not only helps us transition from the analog to the digital, but it also covers the integration of digital technologies by European enterprises or worldwide enterprises, and the impact on society of new technologies. We have started having this conversation with the previous speakers, but I wanted with you to reflect on what I call kind of the 4 stages of digital transformation. And if we could go please to the next slide. This is totally me doing my thinking. Again, we are in a time when we're living this transformation. So we have to make sense of it. And I like to ask myself always questions about the recent history of these technologies. I would say we went, there are different stages. And we can see that at a macro level, for the whole history of technology and its impact on society, but also at a micro level, which is for each innovation that is put out there. So we have a first stage where we are very optimistic about the disruptions that can be brought by these innovations. You know, tech takes everything by storm and positively transforms societies. I won't, spend too much time on that. We have all good examples in the recent past, but also in the past, of how technology has been able to transform how we live in our societies. But rapidly, when that optimistic disruption was the main focus when launching an innovation, or when tech started taking over our lives and our societies, well, rapidly after, usually what you will see is that we start asking ourselves about questions about the risks for our society. Some start to ask themselves those risks, but others actually alert about those risks even before they become a reality. I'm saying this as the executive director of an organization called Internet Without Borders, or Internet Sans Frontières. We're a French organization. And many of the scandals that we saw in the recent years related to technology, many of those had been discussed by many organizations, including ours, even before they became a problem. The scandals around data leaking, around mishandling of personal data of users, of technology users, the risks of bias in relying too much on artificial intelligence, as we are increasingly going towards that path. Risk with regards to what happens when a digital infrastructure falls into the hands of a group that does not favor freedoms. And I'm thinking here specifically, of course, about what's happening currently in Afghanistan. So there are groups that usually are proactive in seeing those risks and trying to alert society. But what with my disappointment as a leader in the civil society sector, my disappointment is that we are usually not that much hurt until the harms are done, unfortunately, and until we reach a stage which I would call the democratic danger stage, in which, well, the damages are becoming so profound that we tend to overlook the damages and forget about the positives. I think we're in this very interesting, space in which we're not really that sure anymore about the tech benefits to our society, and that's the time when the urgency to rein in and regulate big technology, regulate innovation, discussions around all these issues are becoming more strongly advocated by governments and also by other actors, including civil society actors. And this time is interesting for me, again, from my experience, because it allows innovation even in the way we, as actors, as stakeholders, we contribute to making sure that tech is better, remains a good for our societies. And that moment of, creativity calls for absolutely new ideas. And one of these new ideas that I would like to explore with you this morning for me and this afternoon for you is around this idea that all the stakeholders that are using the internet, that are co-creating this digital world, this digital future that we're building together. Well, we have to come together to find the solutions to the main harms that we're seeing. That's my experience. There is no way only one actor can solve all the problems. There is no way only companies can solve the problems. There is no way only governments have the responses with their regulation. And there is no way that me and we as civil society actors, I'm saying we as with my colleagues, thinking about my colleagues, we do not have all the solutions. And that's why I like to say, use an expression, a very famous expression, it takes a village. I think it takes a village to save democracy from the harms and the risks that technology innovation can bear for society, especially disruptive technologies. And I will ask if we could go to the next slide, please. And this multi-stakeholderism approach, which basically calls for having all these stakeholders sitting at the table together on, I wouldn't say, ideally an equal, equal foot, and that calls for collaborating, co-creating together, just like the infrastructure, mirroring the infrastructure of the internet. Internet is a network of networks. And I think that the solution that will come for the network of networks to be healthier and to continue to bring positive impact to our societies is by mirroring that interconnectivity thinking together collectively about the solutions. And this is something that I personally, and that's where I would also, again, like to share a story with you. That's why I've decided to invest a huge amount of my time this past few months on two initiatives. The first one is the Facebook Oversight Board, which was launched a year and a half ago now, and which makes binding decisions on content decisions, content moderation decisions that Facebook and Instagram make every day on their platforms. For those who are not aware with this, I would say, kind of emerging discipline of content moderation, well, it's the process through which a company enforces its rules. In the case of Facebook, it calls it its community standards. We are not allowed, for instance, to share hate speech on social media platforms increasingly. So the process of moderation is a process through which moderators will enforce the rule that says you're not allowed to post hate speech. And so the Oversight Board is a kind of appeal mechanism that had been called for a lot by organizations, including my organization. And that tries to not only apply this idea that it's possible to have an oversight of what happens in the content moderation process, internal processes of companies. Not only does the board, puts that vision forward, but also I think that the board is a very interesting experiment to see what it means to apply business and human rights principles in the technology industry and sector. I'm saying this as we are, increasingly reflecting, and it was also addressed by the previous speakers. It's increasingly a conversation that is becoming normalized, even within the companies, and that's where I think it will be extremely interesting for the audience today and for GIZ in general. Even within the companies, there are increasingly serious discussions about human rights. Companies are important actors of that digital transformation, together with governments, of course. But it's important that this conversation on human rights, on democracy, is also widespread within the companies. We're seeing it, for instance, with these companies increasingly having teams dedicated to making sure that they apply to themselves principles around human rights. And the Oversight Board is extremely interesting because it's virtually the first time in history that we have the ability to say, what are the principles that should guide us when we are creating tech in general, but in this case, enforcing content moderation processes. And that time is extremely interesting again and unique in history because it's a time of innovation, definitely. We are mirroring the tool that we're using and the tool that we're overseeing, in this case, content moderation on Facebook and Instagram, and we are innovating. We're trying to think through, what does it mean to protect freedom of expression on the social media platforms? What does it mean to protect people's safety on social media platforms? What does it mean to protect peace when dealing with content on social media platforms? These are some of the questions that we're asking ourselves. What does it mean to protect privacy while allowing freedom of expression? Another very important question. So I think it's important to bear this in mind, that there are increasingly ears within companies open to hearing, not necessarily, we will not sing always positive songs to their ears, because, human rights is, and respecting human rights is extremely important, yet very challenging at the same time, especially in these times where democracy is increasingly threatened around the world. We have data backing this up. We have been observing this in the past, I would say 5 years at the very least. So it's really a moment where everyone has a role to play, including companies. And I'm extremely happy and reassured to know that this is a major issue from them as well, for governments, obviously, and for the agencies. And of course, an organization like GIZ is very well placed to, push that message forward, especially in the digital transformation space. When we talk digital transformation, we should take stock of what history has taught us: that precipitation is never an ally and a friend of human rights and responsible innovation. The second experience and story that I wanted to share with you this morning to help us better understand what is at stake when we talk about digital transformation for different actors. I've recently launched Stanford University as the director of a lab, the Content Policy and Society Lab. Yet again, I'm focusing on content, but on content online. But I think this issue is really at the heart of, what we should be observing when we're talking about digital transformation and the impact that transformation has on our societies. And I would like to insist on that, because when I arrived I'm currently in the Silicon Valley, as I said. Initially, I didn't come from Stanford. I came sent by my organization to better understand what is Silicon Valley, who are these people making decisions that have so much impact on our everyday lives and on everyday lives of people, even further than Europe, 25,000 kilometers from here, for instance, from the Valley. And I think that decision of my organization was transformative, absolutely. It has helped us understand how the companies work. And I think this is a conversation that we're not having enough, even at government level. I would even say, unfortunately, especially at government level, it's important to understand how these companies are built, how they are organized, what is their architecture. I know we're talking about huge companies. Some of them have hundreds of thousands of employees, hundreds of divisions. But it's important to better understand, because once you do that, and it's really something that I've learned through my experience, once you do that, you are first of all aware, you increase your knowledge, which is never a bad thing in this knowledge-based society, but also you're also aware of the challenges that the counterpart might be facing. And I think that part of the conversation is extremely important, especially when we're talking about digital transformation. I have 1 minute left, so I'll go very fast. It's important to understand what the challenge is, because when we are working together on a solution within this multi-stakeholder approach to digital transformation, it is important to be aware of what the reality of your counterpart and the other stakeholder is. Me, as a civil society organization, it seemed very simple from an outside perspective to say, you should just delete hate speech. But it has huge implications for teams like product teams. I'm not ashamed to admit today that I did not know what a product team was until very recently, but that's very serious, and that's a serious lack of knowledge. So just to say that this initiative will foster those conversations about multi-stakeholderism, about getting to know each other much better. Companies, governments, civil society organizations getting to know much better our separate works. And I will ask that we'll pass on to the last slide, which is an invitation to think about the digital transformation as an opportunity for openness. Absolutely. For collaboration, definitely. We've said that in the previous session as well. And last but not least, especially in these COVID times where we are challenged in our beliefs and certitudes, well, with a lot of humility. Thank you so much for your attention this morning. And I look forward to the discussion that will come next.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Julie. This was absolutely fantastic. And I would never have guessed that it's the middle of the night where you are. So thank you so much for getting up at the crack of dawn. I'm joined here with by Kathrin Lorenz again, and we'd love to have a conversation with you using our questions, but amazing number of questions have come through on my assembly as well. So using the interest of the people out there. And I can tell you there's a lot of interest in hate speech. There's a lot of interest in the question of control. And there's also some challenges on what you were saying about working with the bad guys. I'm just going to sort of summarize. And I've understood that you're saying it's important to understand the players who are out there who have all this power. And I also heard, I think, a little bit that the companies are also open, the whole question of humility, are open to listening to civil society organizations and using your expertise. But perhaps first of all, Kathrin, do you have any immediate question for Julie?
Yeah, I don't know, maybe some points of reflection as well. Thanks so much, Julie, and thanks for this inspiring speech that you gave us. And I took some notes, of course, and I was also linking to further to our earlier discussions. So I really liked how you described how the discussion started with this business perspective, and now we really have to look at the people's perspective. And I think this is also at the center of our business, of course. As you put it, what is the impact on societies of these new technologies? And how can we help societies shape their own future, taking into account this impact? And this impact can sometimes materialize in new divides, digital divides. It can be far away from the leave no one behind that you also mentioned earlier, Natasha. So I'd be happy if there's questions also interested by our participants. Maybe you can elaborate a bit more on that. So if we take this serious and it's about the impact on societies, what would be a role in helping shape societies and embracing this this impact of new technologies for the better? So that's definitely one element I would be interested in. And also I align with the questions related to hate speech and control that Natasha outlined.
Yeah, perhaps we can start, with, Julie, with hate speech and control. There's a question here which has just been pushed down to the bottom because so many questions are coming in. Here we are. Are there good examples on no hate speech online campaigns, which includes, for example, online guidelines, mobile application with advice, how to react against hate speech, web trainings, short videos, so getting people prepared? Let's start with that one, perhaps, Julie.
Yes, of course. Thank you so much for the question and again for the invitation this morning. I think this question is closely related to what I think Kathrin was just alluding to, which is leaving no one behind, especially leaving no one behind in the understanding of what is at stake and the rules kind of the internet, right? And this question regards to great initiatives around hate speech. I think the best one are the ones that involve citizens, that make them, first of all, more responsible and more to understand better that whatever we do online has impacts offline. I think this is something that we still, struggle with, understanding that there are links, that virtual and analog are the same now, especially even more in COVID times. So, well, the example is us discussing this morning, right? So we one of the examples that I would like to share with you with regards to best practice in fighting against hate speech is one that my organization has worked on. We think it takes a 3-level approach to respond to hate. First of all, you have to educate people because, like you said, not everywhere around the world people understand that hate speech is not okay online. We are not starting from the same level, with the same level of knowledge, obviously. And especially, we're not starting with the same level of understanding of the impact that having access so suddenly to so much information in societies where maybe information was controlled by one entity, usually a government entity, switching from that to a stage where you have an overload of information, it's absolutely difficult to understand, the rules, how things function there, the etiquette kind of. So it's important to educate first stage. And this is something that we did through a project called No Bad Mob. No Bad Mob, it's English pidgin from Cameroon, where I'm also from. And that means no bad talk, basically, not a bad mouth. And we first trained civil society organizations, particularly organizations familiar with the issues around freedom of expression. And we trained them, journalists, human rights defenders, women's rights activists, many other, about those what is hate speech online and how to fight against it while respecting freedom of expression, because that's, I think, the biggest challenge. Suppressing hate speech while not suppressing freedom of expression. And so once we've trained them, they became observers of what is happening on the networks, on the social networks, on the main groups, who are the main purveyors of hate speech in different countries where we worked on. We think that local expertise is unique and is not sufficiently tapped into. And it's kind of perceived as, grassroots. I always feel uncomfortable because I feel like when people use grassroots, there's a kind of, minimization of the effort that we're making. But nevertheless, I think that grassroots knowledge, that local knowledge, is extremely important, especially in an age of digital transformation, especially when transformation hits countries for which that disruption could be huge, actually. So I think it's important to tap into this local knowledge because, and I'll end up there, once that community is trained on what hate speech is, what freedom of expression online means, once that community also becomes an actor in identifying, in explaining what hate speech and disinformation actually mean and look like in their countries, and when they explain that to big tech or to government or to their own governments who are increasingly censoring the internet because of hate speech and disinformation, well, when these actors become actors themselves of the fight against hate speech, that has a huge societal transformation and we leapfrog in the understanding of what is this harm that we're talking about. So this is one example that I would give. There are many others. There are bots that are programmed to respond to hateful comments on, it's very widely used by media organizations like the New York Times, The Guardian. It's been documented. There's also increasingly the use of automated content moderation. So the machine will recognize words, images, sounds that are not allowed on the platform, or at least that are assimilated over time to hate speech and are therefore forbidden. But that has, that's quite dangerous to some extent for freedom of expression. But I probably won't have the time to get into the details, but these are some examples that I would like to mention.
Those are great examples. And let's perhaps just also pick up some of the questions here, because I think that we could really do with hearing your voice on where's the boundary between countering hate speech, as you've just said, and cancellation or censorship. So we've understood this is something which needs to be negotiated. What does hate speech mean for me in my context? But where's the boundary between cancellation and censorship?
The boundary is the risk of harm. I think we need to ask ourselves these questions. What is the potentiality of having hateful discourses being normalized online? Because that's what it's about. When we're not deleting something, when something is available, when something is visible, then it's okay. And that's not only in the digital world, that's also in the physical world, So the normalization of that discourse online by not moderating it, by not understanding it, because that's another challenge. We've talked about NLP, natural language processing. It's increasingly being used for automated content moderation, but most AI moderation systems right now do not understand, Fulani in West Africa, Lingala in Central Africa, to give just a few examples. To give you an even more precise example, recently the Oversight Board had to, publish a decision on a case that involved I think it was an Indian language, I'm not sure. And the community standard that was violated was not even available in the said language. So how can you understand what is not okay to post about, or what you're able to post about when you don't even understand it? So I think that there is a need for context that is lacking, obviously, and the context comes into the form of language, culture, community, you name it. And that's why that local knowledge that I was talking about, that community knowledge, let's call it like that, is so important, extremely important. But to tap into that knowledge, we have to go to the people who have this knowledge. And these people are rarely in government. That is true. I mean, they are. But if you really want to have an accurate vision of society, try to speak to those who live in that society in the first place. So, yeah, that's one of the answers.
And do we actually have the will, which is another question which I'm seeing right at the top of our list? Sorry, but I don't quite buy it. Social networks are sellers of advertisement space, nothing more, nothing less. This whole freedom of speech and empowerment discourse is just a fig leaf.
Yes, well, that's absolutely a discourse that's being widespread. But I think we can say that probably from the comfort of our societies, where indeed, we have institutions that are stable, that can respond to, any forms of danger. But if we step out of our comfort zone and think about societies where the institutions are not so stable, where the reception of information, the huge flow of information, as we were talking about, which is also the internet. I mean, in a lot of countries, the first and the only entry to the internet is social media networks. So once we understand that for billions of people around the world, and for a lot of societies around the world, probably the majority of them, this is not just an advertisement platform. People don't even have money to make advertisement. And they're not even targeted because they're not, the kind of advertisement that can necessarily end up in someone using its credit card to buy something online. So I think it's important. And that's why I was talking about collaboration, humility, learning, always stepping out of our comfort zone. That's probably one last aspect that I would add. So yes, no, it's not just about advertisement. For a lot of societies around the world, which are, again, probably the majority of them, it has a lot of impact. And if we think that, that's just far away, it doesn't concern me, I'm me in the US. Well, that's not necessarily true, because we tend to see in history, recent history has proved that it's absolutely always the case. A lot of dangers happen in places where there's no regulation, where there is no interest, before they backlash to societies that are more robust and more stable.
Thank you so much. We'll come to some questions on regulation and control in a minute. There's an interesting question here about digital transformation and the negative effects on society. Can you work, or how can you work, with an authoritarian government that can shut down the internet when it wants? Do you have any tips?
As you know, I think it's important to, even with authoritarian regime, to understand their position. We have seen that in several examples, that it can prove to be it can produce positive outcomes. A lot of them, not all of them, a lot of the attempts to shut down the internet, or to shut down definitely internet, are about control. We've talked about it, and are really, an intention to better control the discussion and the narrative. And there is also some part of that, a lot of part of that, which bears out of ignorance. plain ignorance of how internet functions, of what internet is even, of the benefits that internet have beyond just allowing people to be free and to criticize the government online. And once we understand that, I think we can separate governments, authoritarian ones as well, into different categories. There are some that are ignored, like I was saying, and who are willing to learn, willing to better understand. And we should not shy away from those, including those in the conversation. And that's something that we've done with several regimes, including the worst ones, including in a country like Chad, explaining to them what the internet is in the first place. I think, talking about humility, I think this is definitely a first step for many of them. So, and it has proved efficient. We have instances in which, after this explanation, after this discussion with civil society organizations, but also with companies and also with counterpart governments, well, we have seen examples where the government backed up on their attempt to do censorship. So I think it's possible. It depends the category. Obviously, you won't talk to China the same way you would talk to Chad, given the advance in the censorship apparatus. But I think it's important, nevertheless, to ask ourselves about that and gain knowledge and share knowledge with those governments too.
Kathrin, what else would you be interested in hearing from
No, I guess these are already many good points that we are actually interested in. I'm already thinking about my takeaways, so maybe we'd rather have another round of questions and then I'll come in again.
Well, one question, I love it. It's how to educate faked people. So I guess, I guess it's all about how to build trust, perhaps, and get people who have been faked to really want to understand.
Wow, that's a very tough one, but yet extremely important one. There's not one fits all solution to this. The first one, I think, will be on the responsibility of the platforms themselves. They probably have to be more transparent, I think. When trust is broken, the first thing to restore, the first way to restore that is by being open, but not being open on your own terms, because that's not interesting, right? Or the best learning and the best restoration of that relationship, trustful relationship. The meaningful transparency that I'm talking about is one, first of all, that's accessible. We know a lot of companies and even governments that put out a lot of data out there in a totally unfriendly way. People cannot understand, the citizen cannot understand. So definitely have no interest in probably getting into the conversation. So meaningful transparency would be the first step. And then as civil society organizations, what we will continue to do, we already do that. But I think one thing we must continue to do is continue learning about what it means to be informed massively. So in 21st century, we're all learning. I'm still learning every day. And that's why I was, again, saying during my speech that I'm actually finding this period extremely interesting, because when we all don't have the answers, it's the best time for creativity and continued learning. And I think, yes, to restore that trust, it's probably a way to tell those fake people that not all is lost, with the internet in general, social media particularly, but there's more than just social media on the internet. And yes, we can continue to learn from each other, to learn about this new space and to create together the better future that we want. Because I truly believe that what lies ahead is positive, no matter what.
Really making sure that that conversation is kept up, no matter what people have experienced in their past in terms of being faked, but also, as we're also reading here, vulnerable sectors who cannot or do not even have access to technology. Kathrin, we're coming to an end before we go to the break. What are takeaways that you're taking with you, but also that you think will be important for the discussions that we have moving forward? Maybe
just to name a few, even though these last words by Julie were just so nice and inspiring, it's almost sad to lower it again. No, but first of all, I mean, the spirit spirit, huh? It's a time where we are all learning. It's a time to find solutions together, and it's about creativity. So I think definitely take this up as a takeaway as well. I really like the phrase "when digitalization hits communities," because I think this really describes what's going on. Digitalization is a context factor. It is happening, and we have to be there together with everyone else to see how we can shape it towards an inclusive digitalization, towards a just digitalization. So that really inspired me. I think we cannot shy away from this task because it is happening and it's about shaping it together. And that really leads me to the third point, which I think is definitely an element, very important element of our work as GIZ, that we have to approach this in a very contextual manner. We really have to look at the sites, at the communities, at the local realities where we are, where we work with our partners, to know what's actually best to shape this transformation. And it strikes me because in a way, this digital transformation debate is always so global. And I think you really made a point also with your examples to really make it also a very contextual element of what we have to look at. So that was really inspiring. Thanks so much for that.
And what does freedom of expression mean for me? What does it mean for us in our community? That's a great quotation that I'm taking with you. And I think what we're all taking from you, Julie, is this hunger to learn, hunger to understand more and more. And if that means going into the organizations, going to see the bad guys who I'm reading on my computer screen, then this is going to be, one way of making sure that we do actually understand this great big digital transformation from the inside out. Julie, thank you so much for being with us. Please go back to bed. And I think you're going to get a huge round of applause from everyone here in the studio. Thank you so much for being with us. And yeah, I promised you it was new horizons that you would be experiencing here. And now it's time to refuel before we continue some more new horizons. We'll see you back here at 2:20 our time, and looking forward to a panel discussion there with more inspiration. See you in 20 minutes.